The moment the world held its breath, lights in the studio burned hot. Sundar Pichai could feel the weight of a billion eyes. Even though there were just a few hundred people in the audience, the cameras were already rolling. Producers whispered. Into their headsets, a bright red sign glowed at the back of the room, on air. He swallowed and smiled politely. But inside, his heart raced. He hadn't slept the night before. And now, here he was, about to face one of the richest, most powerful men in the world, live on television. Earlier that morning, his phone had buzzed. It was a simple message from his assistant. The billionaire wants a public apology. He says if you don't, he'll ruin you. Sundar stared at the words for a long time. Apologize to a billionaire. All because of one moment of honesty he had shown. 2 weeks ago, during a private meeting. He remembered that meeting vividly. The billionaire, whose name everyone in Silicon Valley whispered with fear, had stormed into the room, furious that Sundar had rejected his proposal. He wanted Sundar to sign a secret deal to collect and sell millions of users' personal data. It's just business, the billionaire had said, with a cold smile. But Sundar had quietly said no. He refused to betray people's trust like that. The billionaire's face turned dark. He leaned in close and hissed, "You will regret this. I will crush you. You will apologize to me. On your knees, in front of everyone." Sundar didn't answer, but now, as he sat on stage, waiting for the interview to begin, he wondered if maybe the billionaire was right, but maybe this was the end of his career. The host, a tall woman with sharp eyes, walked over to Sundar and whispered, "Just to remind you, sir, the billionaire is watching. He's backstage and he's not happy." Sundar nodded silently. Then the music started. The crowd clapped, the lights flared, and the host spoke into her microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, today, live on air, we have a very special guest, the CEO of one of the biggest companies in the world, the man who has transformed technology for millions. Please welcome Sundar Pichai." The crowd cheered politely. He smiled, stood up, and shook the host's hand. They sat down in 2 leather chairs on stage. The host wasted no time. "Sundar," she began, "you've made a lot of people proud, but lately, you've also made some powerful enemies. People say you insulted a billionaire in a private meeting. He's here tonight, and he says you owe him an apology. What do you say to that?" The crowd fell silent. Sundar looked straight ahead. He could feel his palms sweating. His throat was dry. The billionaire, somewhere behind the curtains, was watching. The whole world was watching. Should he just apologize? Should he just say sorry and keep his job? His mind flashed back to his childhood in a small town in India. He remembered his father, a quiet man who worked in a factory, telling him one night under the stars, "Never hurt people, never lie, and when you are afraid, do the right thing anyway." The host leaned closer. "Well, do you have something to say to him?" Sundar took a deep breath. "I have something to say," he replied. His voice was steady now. The host smiled tightly. "Go ahead." But before he could speak, something unexpected happened. The curtains behind him parted, and the billionaire himself walked on stage. The audience gasped. The billionaire was tall, wearing an expensive suit, his eyes hard as stone. He walked right up to Sundar, towering over him. "Say it," the billionaire growled. "Say you were wrong. Say you're sorry. Do it now." The crowd held its breath. Sundar stayed seated. Inside, his heart was hammering. He could feel his whole body tense. But he thought again of his father's words. He knew what he had to do. He looked up at the billionaire, and his mouth opened. But what he said next would shock everyone in the room. And it would change everything. The words nobody Silence inside the studio was thick and heavy, like a storm cloud waiting to break. Sundar could feel it pressing down on his shoulders as the billionaire stood before him, glaring. The cameras zoomed in, catching every flicker of emotion on their faces. Thousands of tiny lights from phones in the audience blinked like fireflies. Everyone was holding their breath, waiting for him to crack. Sundar kept his eyes on the billionaire, even though his instincts told him to look away. The man's presence was overpowering. His suit was perfect, his tie flawless, but his face was hard and cold. His lips curled into a faint sneer, as if he already believed he had one. Sundar remembered stories he had heard about this man. The newspapers called him a genius, but also a tyrant. People whispered that he once fired a whole team just because they disagreed with him in a meeting. Some said he had destroyed the careers of anyone who stood in his way. And now, here he was, inches away, demanding submission, demanding that Sundar bow his head and say the words, "I'm sorry." For a moment, Sundar thought about how easy it would be to just say it. Just 2 simple words. Everyone would clap politely. The billionaire would smile, shake his hand, and maybe even let him keep his job. But then he thought of the employees who worked for him, the young engineers who stayed up all night fixing bugs, the mothers and fathers who trusted his company to keep their data safe, the kids in his hometown who still sent him letters saying he was their hero. He thought of his father again, sitting on the porch at night, the faint glow of street lamps, the warm air smelling of dust and jasmine, his father's quiet voice, telling him, "When you stand up for what is right, you will always stand alone at first." But if you stand tall, others will see you. And they will stand too. His fingers clenched into fists on his lap. He took a deep breath. The billionaire leaned closer, his voice low and mocking now. You really think you're better than me? You really think you can refuse me and get away with it? Don't be a fool. Say it. Say you're sorry. And this ends right now. The host was frozen in her chair. The audience looked from one man to the other, some of them shifting uncomfortably. Even the cameraman didn't move. Afraid to make a sound, Sundar looked down for a moment, letting the weight of the situation sink in fully, and then slowly he stood up. The billionaire stepped back, surprised. The crowd murmured. Sundar's single quotes voice, when it came, was soft at first, but steady. When I was a boy, he began, his eyes still locked on the billionaire, I didn't have much. We didn't have a refrigerator, we didn't have a television, we didn't even have a phone. My parents worked very hard. Every night I would see my father come home tired, and yet he would still sit with me, asking me what I learned that day. He taught me that the most important thing a man can have is his word, and if he breaks it, then he has nothing. The billionaire's expression hardened, but Sundar went on. You came into my office and you asked me to betray millions of people. You told me to sell their trust for money. You called it just business. But to me, it is not just business. These people are not numbers. They are families, children, dreamers, workers. They trusted me, and I will not betray them. The audience shifted again. Someone in the back clapped once, then stopped, unsure if it was allowed. The billionaire scoffed. You think you're some kind of saint. You think these people care what you do behind closed doors. You think they'd care about you if you lost everything tomorrow? You're a fool. They'll forget you. Sundar shook his head. Maybe, he said quietly, maybe they will, but I will not forget myself. The host, sensing the moment deepening, leaned forward. So, what are you saying, Sundar? Are you refusing to apologize? Sundar turned, now, not just to the billionaire, but to the whole audience. His voice grew stronger, carrying to the far corners of the room. I am saying that I will not say sorry for doing the right thing. I will not say sorry for protecting the people who believe in me. And I will not say sorry for standing up to someone who uses fear to get his way. Because if we keep apologizing for our principles, then we have no principles left. The room went dead silent. The billionaire's jaw tightened. He stepped closer, towering over Sundar, his face flushed with anger. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, a loud sound came from backstage. A crash, a scream, then hurried footsteps. Everyone turned toward the noise. Two stagehands rushed in from the wings, whispering frantically into the host's ear. She went pale and stood up. The billionaire turned to them, furious. What is going on? The host cleared her throat, her voice shaky. We have to stop the show. There's been an incident backstage. The billionaire froze. Then his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and his eyes widened. For the first time, Sundar saw fear flicker across the man's face. The billionaire backed away from Sundar, staring at his phone, muttering something under his breath. The audience was confused, whispering among themselves now. The host tried to smile at the cameras, but it came out crooked. Ladies and gentlemen, we will take a short break. Please remain seated. But Sundar didn't sit. He just kept watching the billionaire, who was now pacing back and forth, furiously typing on his phone, his hands trembling. The billionaire suddenly looked up at Sundar with a strange expression, part anger, part fear, and part something else. Then he said something nobody expected. His voice was low, but the microphone caught it clearly. You have no idea what you've just done. He hissed, and then, without another word, he turned and walked off the stage. Disappearing into the shadows, the host blinked, unsure of what to do. The crowd was murmuring louder now, confused and anxious. Sundar stood alone in the center of the stage, the lights still hot above him. His breath slow but steady. He didn't know what had just happened backstage, but he knew, deep down, that this was far from over. The billionaire's words echoed in his mind, you have no idea what you've just done. And for the first time that night, a small knot of fear began to form in Sundar's stomach. Whatever was coming next, it was going to be bigger, darker, and far more dangerous than anything he had imagined. The phone call that changed everything. The studio was still buzzing when Sundar finally stepped off the stage. The audience clapped politely, but their faces betrayed confusion, curiosity, even unease. Nobody knew what had really happened. The host kept smiling mechanically, thanking the viewers at home for tuning in, but her eyes darted nervously toward the wings where the billionaire had vanished. Moments earlier, Sundar felt the sweat drying on his skin as he walked down the narrow hallway behind the set. Each step felt heavier than the last. He could still hear the billionaire's words echoing in his mind. You have no idea what you've just done. The backstage corridor smelled of coffee, cables, and anxiety. Stagehands scurried past him without meeting his eyes. Someone whispered into a headset and glanced back at him, their expression tight. Somewhere nearby, a door slammed when he reached his dressing room. Sundar finally let out a breath he didn't know he had been holding. He closed the door behind him and leaned against it for a moment. The silence inside was thick, almost comforting, but a faint ringing in his ears refused to quiet. On the small table in the corner, his phone buzzed violently. The screen lit up with an unfamiliar number. He stared at it for a moment, then he answered. The voice on the other end was low, controlled, and full of urgency. "Mr. Pichai," the caller said without greeting. "We don't have much time. Listen." Carefully, Sundar straightened instinctively. "Who is this?" The voice continued, ignoring the question. "You've just embarrassed a very dangerous man. What happened on that stage, it wasn't just television. You exposed him, you made him look weak, and now, he is going to strike back." Sundar's fingers tightened around the phone. "Who are you?" he asked again, more firmly this time. There was a pause, and then the voice softened just slightly. "Someone who owes you a favor," it said. Sundar swallowed. "Why are you calling me?" the voice replied. "Because I know what's about to happen. You're going to receive an email tonight. It will look harmless, a press inquiry, maybe a follow-up from the show. But if you open it, everything you've built will crumble. Your accounts, your files, your company's secrets, gone." He already set it up before the show even started. This was always his plan. Sundar's blood ran cold. He stared at the floor, his mind racing. "How do you know this?" he asked. The voice chuckled faintly, but there was no joy in it. "Let's just say, I've seen him do it before. I know how he operates, and tonight, you are his target." Sundar sat down on the small couch, his mind a storm of fear and questions. The voice spoke again, sharper now. "You need to decide, Mr. Pichai, if you play his game, if you give in now, you might save yourself for a little while, but if you refuse again, if you stand your ground, you're not just risking your job anymore. You're risking everything, your reputation, your family, maybe more." Sundar closed his eyes, trying to steady himself. He thought again of his father's words. "When you stand up for what is right, you will always stand alone at first. But if you stand tall, others will see you, and they will stand too." He opened his eyes and spoke, his voice quiet but certain. "What do I have to do?" The voice hesitated, then said, "Good. First, don't open the email. Second, meet me at the old clock tower on 3rd Street. Midnight, I'll explain everything then. If you don't come, you're on your own." Before Sundar could respond, the line went dead. He sat there for a long moment, staring at the dark screen of his phone, feeling the weight of the choice before him. Outside the door, he could hear voices, people calling his name, asking if he was ready for the post-show interview, ready for photographs, ready for the press. But Sundar didn't move. He knew now that this was no longer just about a public apology, no longer just about a career. This was something much bigger, much darker, and the billionaire was only getting started. At 11:30 that night, Sundar left his apartment quietly, wearing a simple jacket and jeans, trying not to attract attention. He walked through the quiet streets, his breath visible in the cool night air. The city around him seemed different somehow, every shadow deeper, every sound sharper. By the time he reached 3rd Street, the old clock tower loomed ahead of him. Its hands were frozen at 12, and faint cracks ran down its sides. It was one of the oldest buildings in the city, long abandoned but still standing. He pushed open the rusty gate and stepped into the courtyard. The moonlight painted everything silver and black. A figure was already there, waiting near the base of the tower, wearing a dark coat and a hood pulled low over their face. Sundar stopped a few feet away. "You called me," he said quietly. Figure looked up just enough for him to see a pair of sharp, watchful eyes. "And you came," the figure replied. Sundar could feel the tension in the air, like a wire pulled too tight. "Who are you?" he asked again. The figure stepped closer, lowering the hood slightly. It was a woman. Her face was pale but determined, with a faint scar running down her cheek. "My name doesn't matter," she said. "What matters is that I know how he works. I used to work for him, and now, I work against him." Sundar studied her silently. Her eyes were fierce but tired, as though she had been running from something for a long time. "You're telling me he's going to destroy everything," Sundar said finally. The woman nodded. "He's done it before. 2 others who stood up to him. He has people everywhere. In the media, in the banks, even in the government. They all owe him favors. And if you're not careful, you'll disappear just like they did." Quietly, without a trace, a cold wind swept through the courtyard, making the old gate creak behind them. Sundar tightened his hands into fists at his sides. "What do you want from me?" The woman took a step closer, lowering her voice. "I want you to fight back," she said. "But if you're going to stand against him, you need to know the truth about what he's done, about who he really is, and about the one secret that can stop him." Sundar's breath caught in his chest. "What secret?" The woman glanced around, then pulled a small envelope from inside her coat and handed it to him. He opened it carefully, pulling out a single photograph and a folded piece of paper. The photograph was grainy but clear enough to see. It showed the billionaire younger, but unmistakable, standing next to a man Sundar didn't recognize, and the man lying on the ground in front of him, motionless. Sundar's single quote's stomach turned as he stared at the image. The woman spoke softly, almost as if to herself. That, she said, is the moment he stopped being just a businessman. The moment he became something else. Sundar looked up at her, his pulse pounding in his ears. If you want to bring him down, she continued, you'll need more than courage. You'll need this, and you'll need to decide how far you're willing to go. She stepped back, into the shadows. Think carefully, Sundar, she added, because, after tonight, there's no going back. And then without another word, she vanished into the darkness, leaving him alone under the frozen clock. Holding the photograph that could destroy everything, Sundar stood there, staring at the image, his mind a whirl of fear, anger, and something else he couldn't quite name yet. He knew, deep in his bones, that nothing in his life would ever be the same again. Behind him, the clock's rusty hands shuddered faintly, as though trying to move after all these years, and somewhere far away. In a tall glass tower, the billionaire was already planning his next move. The night of no return. Sundar walked home with the photograph pressed tightly in his jacket pocket. The streets were quiet, but his mind was loud, a relentless storm of questions and doubts. He replayed the woman's words over and over, trying to make sense of what she had shown him under the old clock tower. Each step he took echoed in the stillness, and every sound, the distant rumble of a bus, the whisper of the wind made him glance over his shoulder. When he finally reached his apartment door, his hands were trembling. He shut it behind him and leaned there for a long moment, staring at the dark room. The faint hum of the refrigerator and the glow of the city outside his window were the only signs that the world hadn't stopped. But for Sundar, it felt as if everything he thought he knew was crumbling around him. He sat at his kitchen table, turning the photograph over in his hands again and again. The billionaire, younger but unmistakable, standing with that same cold smile. The man lying on the ground, his face obscured, his body still. And the other figure beside the billionaire, the man Sundar did not recognize, yet felt certain he would need to. He unfolded the piece of paper that had been tucked with the photo. It was a name and a single address. Arun Patel, Warehouse 7, Pier District. Tonight, he stared at the words until they blurred. Arun Patel. Whoever he was part of the secret the woman had hinted at, the secret that could stop the billionaire. But it was already after 1 in the morning. The warehouse was on the far side of the city, in a place where even the police hesitated to go at night. Sundar's body screamed at him to stay, to lock the door and pretend none of this was happening. But another part of him, the part that remembered his father's quiet courage and the promises he made to himself as a boy, told him to stand up. He changed into darker clothes and left his apartment quietly, avoiding the elevator. Outside, the air was colder, sharper. Clouds covered the moon, and the streets in the Pier District were nearly deserted. He took a cab most of the way, then got out and walked the last few blocks. Broken streetlights flickered overhead. The smell of salt water and rust filled the air. Rats scurried between piles of trash. Every shadow seemed to move. Warehouse 7 stood at the end of the pier, its corrugated metal walls streaked with rust and graffiti. A single dim light above the door buzzed faintly. Sundar paused at the edge of the alley, listening. He could hear nothing but the water slapping quietly against the pilings below. He stepped closer, his shoes crunching on broken glass. The door was ajar. He hesitated just for a second, then pushed it open. Inside, the air was heavy and smelled of oil and dust. The warehouse was vast and mostly empty, except for a few scattered crates and a small office in one corner. Light spilled from the office window. Sundar moved slowly, keeping to the shadows. When he reached the office door, he could hear two voices inside. One was calm, measured, the other nervous, almost pleading. He leaned closer. You told me this would never come back to me. The nervous voice was saying, you promised nobody would ever know. Now he's on live TV talking about me. He has her helping him. You said she disappeared years ago. The calm voice replied, smooth and cold. She was supposed to, but apparently she has her own plans now, and so does he. Sundar's breath caught. They were talking about him, and the woman. The nervous voice rose, panicked now. If this gets out, if that photo, you know what's on the line here. I have a family. I can't, the calm voice interrupted, sharp as a knife. Then you should have thought of that before you got involved. Sundar dared to peek through the crack in the door. Inside, a thin man in a wrinkled suit, Arun Patel, he guessed, sat in a chair, wringing his hands. Across from him stood another man, taller, with a shaved head and a black coat, his back to the door. We can fix this. The tall man continued, his tone dark. But you need to stop panicking. You need to stop meeting people in warehouses in the middle of the night. And most of all, you need to stop talking. He stepped closer to Arun, lowering his voice. You're going to get on a plane tomorrow. A quiet place. You'll stay there until this blows over. If anyone asks, you never saw anything. And if you so much as think about opening your mouth. He didn't finish the sentence. Arun nodded frantically, his face pale and slick with sweat. The tall man straightened and turned toward the door. Sundar ducked back into the shadows just as the door opened. The tall man strode out without looking back, his steps echoing across the empty warehouse. Once the sound faded, Sundar risked stepping closer to the office door. Arun was still sitting there, his head in his hands. Sundar pushed the door open slowly. Arun looked up with a start, eyes wide with terror. Who are you?" he stammered. Sundar shut the door quietly behind him. "My name is Sundar Pichai," he said calmly, "and I think you already know why I'm here." Arun's hands trembled. "You shouldn't have come here," he whispered. "You don't know what you're getting into. You have no idea what he's capable of." "Then tell me," Sundar said evenly. Arun stared at him for a long moment. His eyes darted to the door, then back to Sundar. Finally, he let out a shaky breath. "It was supposed to be a deal," he said. "Just one deal. We were supposed to take care of someone who knew too much, make it look like an accident. I didn't know they were going to. I didn't know they'd kill him." Sundar's stomach turned. Arun continued, his voice breaking now. "And after that, they kept me quiet. Threats, money, watching me all the time. I wanted out. But you don't just leave. Not with men like him." He wiped at his face with a trembling hand. "If you expose him," Arun said, looking up at Sundar desperately, "he won't just come for you. He'll come for everyone you care about. He's done it before." Sundar didn't flinch. "Show me the proof," he said simply. Arun hesitated, then reached under the desk and pulled out a small metal box. He opened it and handed Sundar a flash drive. "Everything," Arun whispered. "Emails, contracts, recordings. Enough to destroy him. If you're brave enough to use it." Sundar took the drive, feeling its tiny weight in his hand. "Thank you," he said softly. Arun shook his head. "Don't thank me," he replied bitterly. "Pray for me." Before Sundar could say anything more, the sound of tires screeching outside cut through the silence. Bright headlights flared through the warehouse windows. Arun's eyes went wide. "They're here," he breathed. Sundar pocketed the flash drive and turned toward the back of the office. There was another door, half hidden, slightly ajar. He slipped through it just as heavy footsteps thundered into the main hall. He didn't look back. He ran down a narrow corridor, the walls pressing close, his breath coming fast and shallow. Behind him, he could hear shouts, angry, urgent, and the clatter of boots on concrete. He burst out into the cold night air, his lungs burning, and kept running. He didn't stop until he was far from the pier, lost in the maze of empty streets. He ducked into a quiet alley, leaning against a wall, his heart hammering like a drum in his pocket. The flash drive felt heavier now, as if it carried the weight of everything he had just risked, and everything still to come. He knew one thing, for certain. The billionaire knew he had it now, and whatever was waiting for him next would make tonight look like nothing. The choice that could cost everything. The night had never felt so long. Sundar sat alone in his apartment, the faint glow of the city spilling through the blinds. But he didn't move. The flash drive lay on the table before him, small and ordinary looking, yet impossibly heavy. He stared at it for what felt like hours, his hands resting still on the surface of the wood, his mind a battlefield of memories, questions, and fear. He could still feel the damp air of the warehouse on his skin, hear the footsteps chasing him through the dark. See Arun's wide, desperate eyes before the men arrived. Sundar didn't know what had happened to him after he escaped, and he was almost afraid to imagine. His phone buzzed. Just once. He flinched at the sound, then reached for it slowly. The screen showed a single message from an unknown number. "You're running out of time. Make your move now, or lose everything." He put the phone down, his fingers trembling faintly. He thought about calling the police, but he already knew that wasn't an option. He thought about deleting the files and pretending none of this had happened, but he already knew he couldn't do that either. He remembered what the woman at the clock tower had said. You need to decide how far you're willing to go. Weight of that decision pressed down on him now, heavier than ever. He rose from the table, pacing the room in silence. His mind went back to his childhood, to the nights when he lay awake, listening to his parents talk softly outside his door. How his mother always reminded his father to be kind even when the world was cruel. How his father always reminded him to stay honest, no matter the cost. But what if the cost was more than he could bear? The sudden knock at the door broke his thoughts. Sharp, deliberate, 3 times. He froze, every muscle in his body going rigid. Another knock. He moved quietly to the door and pressed his eye to the peephole. It was her, the woman from the clock tower. She stood there calmly, her hood drawn low over her face, her hands in her pockets. Sundar opened the door and stepped aside to let her in. She moved past him without a word, her eyes scanning the room, then landing on the flash drive still sitting on the table. You got it, she said simply. I got it, Sundar replied, his voice low. She nodded and walked to the window, pulling the blinds aside to peer out at the quiet street below. You understand what's on that drive? She asked after a long moment. Enough to destroy him. Sundar said, enough to destroy more than him. She corrected. He studied her for a moment, noticing the dark circles under her eyes, the tension in her jaw. She had been running probably for longer than he had even known this fight existed. What do I do now? He asked. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. You have two choices, she said. You can take this to the authorities. They'll bury it. They're already in his pocket. You'll be lucky if you walk away alive. Or, she paused, letting the silence stretch. Or, you can go straight to the people. Let the world see him for what he is. But if you do that, he will come after you, and he won't stop, not until he breaks you. Sundar felt the knot in his stomach tighten. And what happens if I do nothing? He asked. Her gaze softened just slightly, but her words were sharp. Then you become like the rest of them, she said, silent, afraid, and he wins again. He looked back at the flash drive on the table. The memory of the billionaire's face flashed in his mind, that sneer of contempt, the cold certainty in his eyes, the way he had growled those words on stage. You have no idea what you've just done.
He thought about the employees who looked up to him, the millions of people who trusted him. The boy he used to be sitting on a dusty porch in India, dreaming about changing the world. Finally, he spoke. If we go public, he asked, how do we make sure the story can't be buried? The woman reached into her coat and pulled out a small device, a satellite phone. She set it on the table beside the flash drive. I already have contacts in several countries, she explained. Journalists who still believe in the truth. If you want to release it, we send it to all of them at once. They publish everything. You won't have time to silence them all. Sundar sat down at the table, staring at the two objects before him, the flash drive and the phone. His fingers hovered over the drive for a long moment. Once you press send, she said quietly, you can't take it back. And they will come for you. You'll have to leave everything behind. Your job, your name, even your family. The words hung in the air like smoke. Sundar closed his eyes, trying to picture the path ahead, trying to imagine the cost. And then, somewhere, deep inside, he felt something shift. A quiet resolve. He opened his eyes and reached for the flash drive. But before he could pick it up, the lights in his apartment flickered and went out. The woman froze, her hand moving instinctively to her pocket. A faint sound came from the hallway outside. The creak of a floorboard. The whisper of a shoe on tile. She met Sundar's eyes, her voice low but urgent. They're here. He snatched the flash drive and stuffed it into his pocket. The woman grabbed the satellite phone and handed it to him. There's a back exit, she whispered. Go, now. Sundar hesitated, just for a second, then nodded. They moved quickly through the dark, her hand guiding him to a narrow door at the end of the kitchen. Just as they slipped out into the stairwell, he heard his front door splinter open behind them. Heavy boots pounded into the apartment. Voices barked orders. They ran down the stairs, their footsteps muffled by the old carpet. At the ground floor, she led him through a service corridor and out into a quiet alley. But the quiet didn't last. A black car screeched to a halt at the mouth of the alley, its headlights blinding. Two men jumped out, dressed in black, moving fast. The woman shoved him toward the opposite end of the alley. Run, she hissed. He ran. The world became a blur of shadows and breathless fear. The woman stayed behind for just a moment, blocking the men's path, before turning to follow him. They darted through side streets, over fences, across empty lots. Finally, when they could run no more, they ducked into a dark stairwell under a bridge. They stood there, gasping for breath, listening for footsteps. When the silence returned, she looked at him, really looked at him. And for the first time, Sundar thought he saw something like admiration in her eyes. You're still holding it? She asked. Nodding at his pocket. He nodded back. Good, she said, her voice soft now. You're stronger than I thought. But before he could reply, his phone buzzed in his hand. He glanced at the screen and froze. It was a video. Sent from an unknown number. With shaking fingers. He opened it. The billionaire's face filled the screen. Calm and cruel as ever. He spoke slowly, each word deliberate. You think you're clever, Sundar. You think you can win. But if you press send, if you release that file, I will make sure you watch everything you loved burn. Your company, your name, your family, all of it. You still have a choice. Come back to me. Apologize. Kneel. And this ends here. But if you don't, if you press send, he leaned closer to the camera, his eyes glinting like ice. Then you will have no idea what I can do to you. The video ended. Sundar stared at the blank screen, his heart pounding, his breath uneven. The woman watched him quietly, waiting and then, very slowly, Sundar looked up at her. His jaw set, his eyes steady. He held up the satellite phone and, with one finger hovering over the send button, he whispered, almost to himself, "Let him come." And he pressed it. The light on the phone blinked once. Then again, the files began uploading. And somewhere far away, the billionaire's empire began to crack. But Sundar knew this was only the beginning, because now there was no going back. Asterisk. The dawn after the storm, moment he pressed send, the alley seemed to fall silent. Sundar stood there holding the satellite phone, his thumb still resting on the button as though the weight of it hadn't yet left his body. A thin beam of dawn light peeked over the horizon, brushing the edge of the sky. With soft gray, the woman beside him exhaled slowly and looked at the phone's blinking light. "It's done," she murmured. But the quiet was deceptive. Because almost instantly, the world started to move again. In the distance, sirens began to wail. Faint at first, then louder, like a storm gathering speed. A sharp breeze whipped through the alley, carrying with it the metallic tang of the city waking up. Exhaust, concrete, something electric in the air. Sundar felt the burn in his chest from running, but he kept his eyes on the horizon. Somewhere, out there, the billionaire was watching. Somewhere out there, a man with all the money and power in the world was realizing that everything he had tried to bury was now breaking the surface, and Sundar didn't flinch. They walked out of the alley, slowly stepping back into a city that suddenly felt sharper, brighter, more dangerous. People were already awake, newspaper vendors opening their stalls, cyclists weaving through traffic, office workers rushing toward trains with coffee in hand. But none of them knew yet what had just happened. None of them knew that while they slept, the truth had finally started to claw its way into the light. At a small cafe on a quiet corner, they stopped. The woman pulled out a folded newspaper and slid it across the table toward him. "It's already begun," she said softly. Sundar opened it and stared at the headline, splashed across the front page. Tech billionaire exposed in explosive leak. Evidence of corruption, cover-ups. And worse below the headline was the photograph he knew too well. The billionaire, younger, standing over a man on the ground. And next to it, smaller still, was an image of Sundar from the night of the TV interview. His expression calm but resolute. The woman stirred her coffee, watching him with quiet curiosity. "You know," she said, her voice almost gentle now. "Most people would have folded. Most people would have taken his deal, kept quiet, let it all go." Sundar didn't look up. He kept his eyes on the paper, reading the lines again and again, feeling every word sink into him like a weight, but also somehow like a release. "I thought about it," he admitted finally. "I thought about giving in. But then I remembered who I was before all this, who my father raised me to be, and I couldn't." The woman smiled faintly, the first real smile he had seen from her. "You did more than stand," she said. "You lit a fire, and now it's too big to put out." Just then, his phone buzzed again. He hesitated before answering, already expecting another threat, another warning. But it wasn't that. It was his assistant's voice, breathless with excitement. "Sir," she said, "you need to see this. The whole world is watching. Your name, it's everywhere. People are calling you a hero." Her words washed over him slowly, not quite sinking in yet. "And him?" Sundar asked quietly. "He's gone," she replied. "He left his house before sunrise. No one knows where. But the authorities are looking for him now. There are protests outside his offices. His own board is calling for his arrest." Sundar closed his eyes, letting the weight of those words settle. But before he could say anything more, the cafe door opened. A man in a sharp suit entered, flanked by two others. They carried themselves with the same quiet authority Sundar had. "Come to recognize." They stopped at his table. "Mr. Pichai," the man said, "I represent a special task force investigating the allegations you've just released. We would like to speak with you. We'll ensure your safety, but you should know The road ahead won't be easy. Even now, there are people who will try to discredit you, to silence you. Are you prepared for that? Sundar looked up at him, and something in his gaze, steady, unflinching, made the man pause for just a second. I'm prepared, Sundar replied simply. The man nodded once, then gestured toward the door as Sundar stood. The woman reached out and touched his sleeve lightly. When he turned, she met his eyes and said softly, "You've done more than you know, more than any of us could." He wanted to say something back, to thank her, to ask her name at last, but she just shook her head and slipped out the side door, vanishing into the morning crowd. The men led him outside, where a black car waited at the curb. As he climbed in, he glanced back at the city. The streets were alive now, people with phones in their hands reading the news, whispering to each other. Something was shifting. You could feel it in the air, like the first crack of lightning before a storm. The car pulled away, and he sat in the back watching the skyline retreat behind him. He thought of everything he'd lost, his home, his quiet life, his sense of safety. But he also thought of what he'd gained, a truth that could no longer be hidden, a chance to stand for something bigger than himself. Hours later, he was sitting in a secure office with lawyers and investigators. They showed him file after file, evidence that confirmed what he already knew, but also things even darker, deeper.